All right, good morning, Shavua Tov. Back to Shmuel Aleph. Let's share the screen straight away. There we go. So we have David running away from Shaul, comes to the city of Nov. Achimelech, we'll come back to that name a little bit later today. Achimelech is the priest, and he suspects something's amiss because he says to David, "Why are you here alone? Nobody's with you." David doesn't tell him the truth, says he's on a special mission for the king, and he asks for supplies. He asks for bread. Achimelech says, "I've only got this holy bread." And David says, "Well, have it." And he takes it. And then, having taken the bread, he asks Achimelech for a weapon. Now, before he asks Achimelech for the weapon, we had this interjection of verse 8, which tells us that Doeg, the Edomite, was in the area and it was around. So that's the spectre hanging over this whole story, is Doeg the Edomite. And as we go through the story in the next chapter, you'll see why it's so important that Doeg was said to be there at the time. Be that as it may, David then, having clocked that Doeg is there, and I showed you last week in a later chapter that David says, "I knew this would happen once I saw Doeg was there." So he knew he was there. And despite that, he asks Achimelech for a weapon. And last week we showed that it was unusual for a weapon to be in the Mishkan, because the Torah doesn't allow swords and things like that in the temple. If you're going to make a temple, you have to use stones that are not hewn with a sword. Say a pasuk immediately after the Ten Commandments. We looked at that last week. And the weapon that was actually there, that was given to David, that's not true. It wasn't given to David. Achimelech was very reluctant to give it to him, and he said, "If you want it, take it." As if to say, "Well, I'm not giving it to you, but if you want it, you'll have to take it yourself." And of course, that was the sword of Goliath, of Goliath, which David himself had used to chop the head off Goliath. And so David takes it. And the last verse that we did last week was verse 11. And David arose and fled on that day from before Saul, and he came to Achish, the king of Gath. So, Achish, the king of Gath, and we spoke about that a little bit last time as well, in that Gath was a Philistine stronghold. It was one of the 5 cities that made up of the Philistine stronghold: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, Lachish, and Azah. So Gath was one of their strongholds. And we asked the question, why was it that he went off to the king of Gath when he had himself battled the Philistines, chopped Goliath's head off, and killed a whole bunch of people afterwards? And we basically came down to the bottom line that my enemy's enemy is my friend. The king of Gath was an enemy of King Shaul. David was an enemy of King Shaul, and therefore he ran off thinking that he would get refuge from the king of Gath. But as you will see in a moment, that's not the case. I'm just looking for something which gives me 1 second. Right. Okay. So Achish. Let me tell you about Achish. He came to Achish, the king of Gath. You can see that here in verse 11. Turns out that there were two kings of Gath named Achish, which we see in Tanakh. First one is here, and the second one is in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. It's in Shmuel Aleph, chapter 2. And let's just find that. Hang on a second. Shmuel Aleph, chapter 2. And it came to pass at the end of 3 years that two of Shimmel's slaves ran away to Achish, the son of Maacha, king of Gath. So Achish is a name that we see in Tanakh twice as the king of Gath. Now, I just want to go back to our, there we go. So it turns out that a 7th century BCE royal dedicatory inscription, so 7th century BCE, we are here in the 11th century BCE. So this is an inscription 400 years later, still very old. It was found in Ekron, which is another Philistine city, in 1996, and it indicates that Achish was a popular name of Phoenician kings for many centuries. Now, of course, the Philistines take a lot of influence from the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a seagoing people, and one of the most popular opinions of the one sec, Philip, one of the most popular theories about the origins of the Philistines, is that they were an offshoot of the Phoenicians, that a Phoenician group traveled and docked, as it were, in the ports of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and they somehow or other became the Pelishtim, the Philistines. So this inscription found in 1996 mentions the name Achish in the Phoenician history. It seems to have been a very popular name from the Phoenicians, and this may be a little bit of another proof of the origins of the Philistine nation, which is said to be Phoenician, Greek, a lot of influences from there. Yes, Philip, you're muted. We can't hear you. You are muted. Philip, you are muted.
Sorry.
Right.
There's a fiction today that says that the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, are descendants of the Plishtim, of the Philistines, but that's not true, because the Philistines came from the Philistines. The Philistines. Sorry, came from Phoenicia, and they were Greeks. They were Europeans. They weren't Arabs. But the Palestinians have taken that fiction and made it into a reality today.
Yeah, it's very clear that the Plishtim were of Phoenician origin. This is another proof. This Achish name is another proof. The Palestinians jumping on Philistine history is nothing new. We're used to that as well. It just happens to be. The truth is that who was it that first gave the name Palestine to the Holy Land?
Romans.
The Romans, correct. And why did they give it the name Palestine?
To see that, so that the Jews wouldn't be identified with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly why they gave it the name Palestine.
Yeah.
They wanted to disassociate
Yeah.
the Jews from the Holy Land, which at that time was known as what?
Judea.
Judea. Correct. Yes. So if you've got a place called Judea, that is clearly going to connect it to the Judeans, okay, who are the Jews. So the first thing you want to do if you want to disconnect a people from a territory is you change its name. So, for example, has anybody ever been to St. Petersburg? Neither have I, but I have been to Leningrad, which is the name of St. Petersburg when I was there. So I went to the city which is now called St. Petersburg and was previously called St. Petersburg. But when I went in 1981, which was still during the Soviet era, it was called Leningrad. Now, it was called Leningrad because they wanted to disassociate the previous regime, i.e. the Tsarist regime, from the city. It was called St. Petersburg. St. Peter was one of the Tsarist heroes. So the first thing they did was get rid of the name St. Petersburg and call it Leningrad. And then the opposite happened when communism collapsed. They wanted to disassociate themselves from this failed communist regime and from Lenin, who by that time was disgraced. So they changed the name from Leningrad back to St. Petersburg. And that's how Palestine got its name. The Romans wanted to disassociate the Jews from Judea, and so they called it Palestine. Why did they choose Palestine? Well, they chose Palestine because of the Pelishtim. It's a similar name. That's not to say that the Pelishtim, the today's Palestinians, are descended from those Pelishtim. It was a political act by the Romans to rub the noses of the Jews in the dirt, that not only did they remove the name Judea, they gave the name of their arch enemy. If you read Tanakh, the archest enemy is not Amalek or Moab or Midian or Ammon. All the battles that we are reading here in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, all the way through Sefer Shmuel Bet, and many of the Malachim as well, were against the Pelishtim. They were the arch enemies of the Jews. So the Romans made a political statement by removing the name Judea and replacing it with Palestinia. They also changed the name of Jerusalem. What did they call Jerusalem? Does anybody know? They changed the name of Jerusalem to Iola Capitana, a very Roman-sounding name, removing all references of Jerusalem, all references to King David's conquer of Jerusalem. Iola Capitana, I think it's spelled A-E-O-L-A, Capitana. That was the name that Romans gave to Jerusalem.
I think it's Capitolina.
Could be.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look and see exactly how you spell it. A minute. You're right, Capitolina.
Capitolina, yeah.
Let's have a look and see how you spell it. There we are. Aelia Capitolina. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Aelia Capitolina was a Roman colony founded during Emperor Hadrian's visit to Judea, centered around Jerusalem, which had been almost totally razed. So they changed the name because they wanted to remove Jerusalem as a name because it was too Jewish. Okay, so how did we get onto that? I'm not sure how we got onto that. Oh, yes, we got onto that because Philip said about the current day Palestinians. So I just really wanted to just point out that Achish is a Phoenician name which gives us a clue to the origins of the Plishtim, of the Philistines. So let's go back to our story. Very interesting. So he turns up at the gates of Gat to the king of Gat, to Achish. Verse 12. Vayomru avdei Achish, and the servants of Achish said to him, Halo ze David melech haaretz? Is this not David, the king of the land? They recognized him. Now, why is that a bit surprising?
Because he wasn't the king. He was never the king up until then.
Well, first of all, he wasn't the king, you're right. And secondly, I would say, how did they know what David looked like? There wasn't any photographs of him or paintings of him or anything, really. He didn't have an entourage with him that said the court of King David. He wasn't somebody that had we know that he didn't have anyone with him because Achimelech said to him, what are you doing on your own? So it's a bit, you really have to ask the question really a different way. They recognized him. The question is, why did David think he could get away with it not being recognized? And the answer is that he wasn't famous yet. Well, he was famous because he killed Goliath and what have you. But the bondsman knew him, and presumably these servants must have seen him when he had the battle with Goliath and when he battled the Philistine afterwards. Because, as I said, there were no photographs or Wikipedia or Google to go and look at. But they recognized him. And David thought he could get away with it, but he couldn't. Yes, Johnny.
Rabbi Steinsaltz adds a few words. It says not David, the king of the land, and then Steinsaltz adds the mighty warrior of Israel. They must have heard of him somewhere.
Yeah, they certainly will have heard of him.
But somebody might have seen him.
Yeah, that's the only explanation, because it'd be easy now if I showed you a picture of I don't know, King Charles, right? Oh, okay, not King Charles because he's the king. If I showed you a picture of Prince William, right, who is going to be a future king probably, you would know instantly who it was because we're bombarded with images these days. But there were no images for them to see, so it must have been somebody who had actually been there. Now, this is the reason I'm labouring this point. It must have been somebody who had been there at the time of Goliath, or had fought in the battle after Goliath, where David had killed many Plishtim, because otherwise he wouldn't have been recognized. Now, why is that important? It's important because of what they say. Let's have a look next. Halo lazeh ya'anu b'mecholot lemor. Is this not the one that they would answer or sing out with musical instruments, saying, Hika Shaul ba'alafav, v'David b'rivotav. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. We've had that pasuk before, haven't we? That was what the ladies came out singing after the battle with the Plishtim. And of course, we know that King Saul took umbrage to that because he thought that the ladies were more praising of David. Well, they were more praising of David by tenfold than they were of Saul, and Saul didn't like it. But these men are referring to Achish when they're talking to their king. They are referring to the battle that David had with the Plishtim, and the fact that David had killed tens of thousands of them. So the reason I was laboring that point is that this would have been people who were there. They saw him, and that's why they recognized him. Now, if you had been in a battle with David and you had suffered at the hands of David and you'd lost soldiers and your friends and colleagues, etc., you're not going to be very well disposed to him, are you? And that is exactly what happened. We're not told it explicitly, but what actually was going on here was that the king of Gath was inclined to give David refuge on the basis of my enemy's enemy is my friend, as we said last week. However, the soldiers, the servants, say to Achish, we need to kill this guy. This guy is an enemy of ours. He's a worse enemy than Saul. Saul only killed 1,000. David killed 10,000. And I know that because the ladies came out singing it. So this is what this is all about. This verse 12 is telling us not that the servants are praising David, but that they are saying to Achish, we need to get rid of him. You can't give him refuge. We need to kill him. And David recognized that. He recognized that he'd made an error in running to Gath. Now, the Tanakh, earlier in this chapter, is thinly veiled in its criticism of David. It makes it very clear that David is lying over here when he comes to Achimelech. He's not alone because the king has sent him. He's not got young men hidden somewhere. He's not on a holy mission for the kings that he needs to have a weapon. And more importantly, the Tanakh is telling us with verse 8 that Doeg was there, that David has put in danger the life of Achimelech because he's made Achimelech a rebel against the king by supplying him with food and weapons. And the Tanakh is very critical of him in that regard. Doesn't say it explicitly, but it is. And what the Tanakh is saying is that the punishment comes straight away. The punishment is that David goes to Gath and is not taken in. He's not given refuge. And he understands that he's made a mistake now, because verse 13 says, Vayasem David et advarim eila bilvavo. Vayasem al libo, he puts them on his heart. That's a modern Hebrew expression. In modern Hebrew, if I say to you, sim lev, place it on your heart, what do I mean?
He translated it, he took it to his heart. Yeah, he took these words to his heart.
Yeah, but what does it mean in modern Hebrew if you say sim lev, put it on your heart?
Pay attention.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Correct. Pay attention. You'll often see signs that say sim lev, madrigot. Right? Pay attention. There are stairs here. There are steps or something. So Vayasem alavavoy, he placed these words on his heart, and he took note of what they were saying, i.e., that they wanted to get rid of him. Vayir'a ma'od mipnei Achish melech Gath, and suddenly he's become very afraid of the king of Gath, because he now realizes that instead of getting refuge here because of my enemy's enemy is my enemy, he's my friend, he's now in the situation of being a worse enemy than the first enemy, and he's in danger. So what he then does, what did I want to show you over here? Oh, that's right. I wanted to show you something. What was David's big sin, apart from putting Achimelech in danger? His big sin is that he has undone all...
He's a bit of a womanizer.
We've not got to that bit yet. We'll get to that bit later. At this point, his big sin is that he's undone all the good that he did in the the story of Goliath. What did he say in the story of Goliath? Here we go. I've got it on the screen for you there. It's chapter 17. He says, I'm going to battle the giant. And he says, this day, verse 46, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I shall slay you and take off your head. I shall give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines this day to the fowl of the air and the beasts of the earth, and all the earth shall know that Israel has a God. And then he says this, and all this assembly shall know that not with the sword and the javelin doth the Lord save, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hand. So when he kills Goliath, before he battles him, he says, I'm not frightened of you, because Hashem does not need a sword. I don't need a sword. I just have Hashem on my side. The sword is a weapon of humans, and I have Hashem on my side. Now that was a big Kiddush Hashem. Fast forward to what he's done now, is he's taken that very sword that he killed Goliath with, that very sword that he has said at the time of the battle of Goliath, I'm not relying on this sword. This was only just to chop his head off after he'd done him in with a pebble. And he's now relying on that sword. He's taken that sword and he said, look what he says in verse 10 in our chapter. He says, give it to me. He's talking about the sword. There is none like it. Give it to me. There is none like it. So he's relying on this sword, and suddenly all that talk in chapter 17 of how God will save him and he doesn't need a sword, where's it all gone? Where's his emunah gone? It's disappeared. He's now relying on the sword, and he realizes he's made a big mistake because he comes to Gat and the men are not interested in giving him refuge. So he became very afraid of Achish. Why? Because the men knew who he was, and he can't rely on Hashem because he's put his faith in the sword of Goliath instead of in Hashem. So that's what this verse 13 means. It means that David suddenly realized that he's made a mess of things here. And he's in a bit of a pickle. So what does he do?
He's in a lot of a pickle.
He's in a lot of a pickle. What does he do to get out of the pickle?
Read the next pasuk.
Yes, Michael. He feigns madness. Where have you read this before?
Wasn't it with Hamlet?
Hamlet is before King David, is that right?
No. He's after, slightly after.
Slightly after, yeah. Just by about 2,500 years.
No, it was not that much. Not that
Yes,
much.
it was. King David was in 1000 BCE.
Oh yeah. Maybe you're right.
Shakespeare was about 1500 and something.
Yeah,
My
you
math
might be
makes
right.
that 2,500 years. No, where have you? I didn't say where as it happens. Where have you read about King David feigning madness? And I will tell you that you have read this within just over 24 hours ago. You read it around about 25 and a half hours ago.
What, in the Haftorah?
No.
In the Haftorah yesterday?
No.
25 and a half.
2.5 hours ago.
In the Parsha? It wasn't in the Parsha. There's nothing
Wasn't
about
in the
this.
Parsha.
What?
Okay, who's going to tell me? By the way, we've lost David. David has finally decided. He says he's too busy because he's too busy with work to come and to the shiurim. I think he's just being nice, and he's realised that actually he's too clever for our shiurim. But anyway, so where did you read this yesterday? And you read it every Shabbat, so it's not the parasha.
Ah, okay.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to show it to you on the screen. It is Tehillim, chapter
My memory's
34.
going.
And it is part of the davening of Shabbat morning. The David b'shanoto
Oh, yeah.
Avimelech vayigarshehu vayelach of
I tell you,
David.
if I was a Sephardi, I'd do it. But because I sometimes jump things, maybe the Sephardim say every word.
Yeah, well, you should say every word.
We guys sometimes tend to,
Yes, we know. Well,
gloss.
you need to say every word. I'm going to mute you now. So there you go. Right. So of David, when he disguised his sanity before Avimelech, we say it every morning, every Shabbat morning. It's in the extra Tehillim that we say for the davening of Shabbat morning. Now, you'll see that on the screen, I've put the Rashi in because I've got a question, and you should have a question. The Tehillim says, "Le David b'shanoto et ta'amo lifnei Avimelech," and for David, who disguised his sanity before Avimelech, and he ran away. What's your question on that pasuk? Come on, Michael, unmute and tell me your question. I can see it there. It's troubling you.
It didn't happen that way.
Go on. You're right. What's the problem there? Something's not right.
He didn't run away. But Yagoshe doesn't mean to say that he ran away. It means to say he was sent away. He was thrown out.
Let me take you back to our pasuk, and then you'll tell me what's wrong with the Tehillim. David arose and fled that day from before Saul, and he came to Achish, the king of Gath. And they said, "Is this not David?" Blah, blah, blah. And David took these words to heart and became very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his speech before their eyes, and he feigned insanity before them. And he scribbled on the doors of the gate, and he let his saliva run down upon his beard. And Achish said to his bondsman, "Behold, you see a man who is mad. Why do you bring him to me?" That's what the Tanakh says. Now, the Tehillim says, for David, who disguised his sanity before Avimelech, whereupon he drove him out and he departed. Yeah. What's the problem? Come on, wakies.
It wasn't Abimelech.
Yes, it wasn't Avimelech. Who was it?
Achish.
Achish. We've just spent half an hour going through the fact that Achish is a Philistine name. Why, therefore, does David HaMelech himself, he remembers it, he was there. Why does he say in chapter 34 of Tehillim that he disguised his sanity before Avimelech? Was there another time when David disguised his sanity in front of a person called Avimelech? I'll save you the bother. There isn't. Okay? There isn't. This is referring to our chapter. So why does it say Avimelech and not Achish? And that is why I put the Rashi on. Normally, when I put it on, it's like that. Okay? But now I put the Rashi on because Rashi asks that question. Rashi says, Lifnei Avimelech. Why does it say in front of Avimelech? Should say in front of Achish. Kach kol malchei plishtim nikra'im.
They were one and the same.
All Philistine kings are called. In the same way, says Rashi, V'chol malchei Mitzrayim paro. All the kings of Egypt were called Pharaoh. Pharaoh Ramses, Pharaoh this one, that one, the other one. Okay, Pharaoh was the generic term for the king of Egypt. Says Rashi, Avimelech was the name of the generic name of the kings of Plishtim. So this one was Avimelech Achish. Now, how do we know that? How does Rashi know that? Well, from where does Rashi get that from? He might have just made it up. How do we know that the generic name for the king of the Philistines is Abimelech, in the same way that the king of Egypt is called Pharaoh? Okay, let's have a look. Any ideas? Anybody want to come up with an example? There are two examples that I want to show you. One in Parshat Vayera and one in Parshat Toldot. That's a clue. Vayera is the story of whom? Whose life?
Avraham and Yitzchak.
Abraham in Vayera, Yitzchak in Toldot. Correct. So, which story in the life of Abraham, first of all, involves a king of Pelishtim?
Sarah and Avimelech.
Yes, Sarah and Avimelech. Let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at it. It's in chapter 20. Okay. Abraham traveled from there to the land of the south, and he dwelt between Kadesh and between Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. So where is he? He is in Gerar. And where is Gerar? It tells you it's in the south. It's in the territory of the Plishtim. Let's have a look and see if we can find the biblical city of Gerar. There we go. I don't know if you can see this map, if it's big enough for you to see. Where my pointer is Gerar. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Where is that?
West of Tiberias.
No, Gaza
It's in the
City.
Negev. It's in the Negev.
In the Negev. There's the
Negev.
Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Dead Sea, yeah.
It is just above
Gaza.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on the other side. On the other side.
It's above Gaza, and it's a little bit below Ashkelon.
Yeah.
Oh, does that sound familiar to you? Gaza, Ashkelon. Up there is Ashdod. Over here is Gat. Over here is Lachish. Where is Gerar? It's bang in the territory of the Philistines. So Gerar, it turns out, is a Philistine place. Okay, it may not have been a Philistine place at that time, as it were, because the Philistines might not have yet taken hold of it. But it's in their area. It's bang in the middle of their area. And let's go back to Bereshit. And he traveled there. And Avimelech, the king of Gerar. So there's an Avimelech. And he is the king of Gerar. So there's the first guy, who's Avimelech, king of Gerar, connected to the Plishtim. That's in Vayera. The next one is in Toldot. And there we go. The same story, if you remember. The next generation. It was a famine in the land, aside from the first famine that had been in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Avimelech, and this time we're told explicitly, Avimelech, Melech, Plishtim, the king of the Philistines. So that is why Rashi on Tehillim says that Avimelech is the generic term for the kings of Philistine. So when David wrote his Tehillim, he didn't say LeDavid b'shanoto et tamo lifnei Achish. He says lifnei Avimelech. It's like saying Vayomer Yosef el Paro, and Joseph said to Pharaoh, or Vayomer Moshe el Paro. Vayomer and Moshe said to Paro. Doesn't say Paro Ramesses or whoever it was. it just says Paro. So David is using the generic term here for Avimelech, for the king of the Plishtim.
Charles is Charles III.
Yes, Charles is the king, but he's called king, isn't he? And we use the word king. Okay. But by the way, if you look at some of the other kings, they weren't christened by their king name, were they? So Edward the Eighth. No, yes, Edward the Eighth, who abdicated. He took the name Edward the Eighth as his king name. What was his real name?
Edward.
What was the Duke of Windsor? He became the Duke of Windsor, didn't he? What was the Duke of Windsor's Christian
Edward the
name?
Sixth. Edward the Sixth.
What are you talking about? Edward the Eighth.
Are you sure?
Yes.
I think you can't count.
Oh my goodness me! You are really
Okay,
showing
if you
your...
say Edward the Eighth, I'll accept it. You're all English. You're all. I'm a Belgo Englishman, so all right, Edward the Eighth.
There we go. There he is, Edward the Eighth. You're showing your ignorance, Philip.
He's a
Philip.
chap who married that what's her name? That divorcee, right?
Yes, correct.
Mrs. Simmons. Yeah.
Yes, Edward the Eighth, not the Sixth. Philip the
Okay.
Eighth.
All right.
Anyway, what was his name? What was his name?
George, was it?
No. His name was David, as it so happens.
Oh my God.
His name was David. Why am I telling you that? Only because
Because he was a rabid anti-Semite.
He was a Nazi. Why? Because Edward he took a king name. His name was Edward the Eighth when he became king, but he was known as David. George the Sixth, the Queen's father, George the Sixth. What was his name?
Bertie.
Bertie, that's right. So
Robert, not Bertie.
Bertie. So anyway, it seems that Avimelech is the generic name for the king of the Plishtim. And so when we say this on a Shabbat morning, which of course we all remembered that we'd said it yesterday, next Shabbat when we say it, we'll know what we're talking about. We're talking about the episode in Shmuel Aleph chapter 21. Is it? Are we in 20 or 21? We are in chapter 21. And this is what he did. So what had happened was, let's go back to the story. The servants of Achish grab hold of David and they bring him before the king, before Achish. And they say to Achish, isn't this David? Isn't this the guy that killed 10,000 Plishtim? Isn't this the guy that killed Goliath? Come on, let's do him in. And so David took these words to heart. He knew he was in trouble. And so he puts on this mad act. He pretends to be crazy, right? Look at the word here. What did he do? Vayishano et ta'amo. Literally, it means he changed his reasoning. But the next pasuk tells us what he really did. Okay, vayitcholel biyadam, and he feigned madness in front of them. Vayetav al daltotav hasha'a, and he scribbled on the doors. You know, if God forbid you ever have the misfortune to go into a long-term psychiatric unit where there are seriously disturbed, mentally ill patients, you'll often find them scribbling all over the place, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. It's not funny in the slightest. It's dreadful to see these people, but that's what they do. They scribble all over the place.
But isn't there a problem with that? Isn't there a problem that you've got now? Is because he had Goliath's swords. So wouldn't the bondsman have realised that? Whoops, there's something strange going on here, because it says he had Goliath's sword. He must have taken it with him.
Yes, the bondsmen are not buying it. You're right. Let's just see what happens. So he's doing this big lunatic act, scribbling on the doors and dribbling down his beard, letting the saliva run down his beard. You know, you can picture it, can't you? He's a crazy guy. Now, Achish, it turns out, and I'll show you the Rashi. I'll show you the Rashi again in a minute from the Tehillim to prove what I'm going to say. Achish also doesn't really buy this madness act, but Achish, it turns out, is a good guy. How you can have a good guy as the king of the Plishtim, I don't know, but it turns out he is. Vayoma Achish el avadav, and Achish said to his servants, Hine, tiru, look, ish mishtageya. Mishtageya. What's the root of that word?
Meshuggah.
Meshuggah. What have you brought me this Meshuggah for? And then he says, he could be Jewish, this king of this Achish. Look what he says. Why have you brought me this lunatic? Chatar Meshuggah imani. Am I short of lunatics? That's what he says. Do I lack lunatics? Chatar Meshuggah imani. Have I not got enough Meshuggahs to deal with? What are you bringing me with another one for? I don't need this Meshuggah here. Get rid of him. Why should I?
Why do you remind me of him? Why do you remind me of him?
I remind you of Achish.
Yes.
So you remind me of David.
David's not said a word at this stage, has he, Johnny? Not said one word.
No, all he's done is act like a lunatic.
No, but I mean, he just walked into the camp. He never said hello. And
it seems that as soon as he was seen, the bondsman recognized him, and arrested him. So brought him before the king. He plays the lunatic card, and Achish is trying to find an excuse, according to Rashi anyway. Achish is trying to find an excuse not to kill David. It seems that Achish is a good guy, and he doesn't want to kill David. So he says to his bondsman, I don't need any more lunatics. I've got enough, thank you very much. I know how I feel. Right? Do I have a lack of lunatics? So you brought me another one who's going to drive me Meshuggah even more? What do I need this for?
Steinsaltz writes a very interesting piece on this.
Sure.
I'll say from the beginning, Am I Lacking Madmen is the title. People are generally not concerned about madmen, and they are, and they are not usually harmed in some cultures, and certainly in the ancient world. The insane were protected due to the belief that they were somewhere on the spectrum between eccentricity and holiness. David's life was surely in danger due to the fact that he was alone, surrounded by the Philistines, but he had good reason to kill him. Consequently, he pretended to be a madman, and he wrote a special psalm of thanksgiving in the light of this, Psalm 34.
Right, so that's exactly what we saw. Psalm 34 before is what we said yesterday in Davni.
Oh, is that the one, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So they were looked after the madmen, they weren't.
There you go, there's Psalm 34.
Yeah.
David, let's have a look at this. So he saved him. We'll look at the Tehillim in a sec. Let's go back to the story. So Achish says to his servants who want to kill David, I don't need another lunatic. I've got enough. Why should I bring this one into my house? And that's the end of the chapter. So we need to just have another little look at what's coming next. And so he kicked him out. Instead of killing him and bringing him into the house as a captive, because he doesn't want another lunatic in the house, he's got enough already. Vayelech David Misham, vayimalet el me'arat adulam. And David went away from there and he escaped. So as a result of Achish going against his own servants, David was able to escape. And as Rav Steinsaltz says there, after he escaped, he wrote a song of praise. And the song of praise is Tehillim chapter 34, which is what we've been looking at. Of David, when he disguised his insanity before Avimelech. Avimelech was the name of Achish because Avimelech was the king. Whereupon he drove him out. See, he didn't want him to bring him in his house. That's what we just learned. He drove him out by Yelach, and he was able to go away. So in other words, this was David's escape from danger. So what do you do when you escape from danger? What do we do when we go through a dangerous experience and we come through the other end? What do we do?
Thank God.
We bench Goimel.
Bench Gomer.
And we thank God. And that's exactly what he did. Avaracha et Adonai b'chol eit. I will bless Hashem at all times. Tamid tehilato b'fi. His praise will always be in my mouth. Bashem titalel nafshi. My soul will praise Hashem. Yishma'u anavim vayismachu. May the humble hear and rejoice. So look at what Rashi says here, just above. Rashi says, Umedrash Agadai, quotes the Midrash, Shahayat Tzaddik. He was a tzaddik, this Achish. Avimelech, like Avimelech, Shenichtav Batorah Etzel Sarah. If we go back and look at the story of Sarah, what did Avimelech do? Avimelech did not harm them, and he sent Abraham away with great riches. Avimelech, Gerar, in the story of Sarah over here, is a tzaddik. Okay? Avimelech arose early in the morning and he summoned all his servants and he spoke all these words in their ears. And the men were very frightened. And Avimelech said to Abraham, "Why have you done this?" And he said, Avimelech took flocks and cattle and manservants and he gave them to Abraham. And he said, people, nobody is allowed to harm this man. Okay? And so he was a tzaddik. Avimelech was a tzaddik. And so Rashi says on Tehillim 34 that this Achish was the tzaddik in the same way as his namesake Avimelech with Sarah was a tzaddik. Shelo ratzah lahorgo. He didn't want to kill him. Achish did not want to kill David. Va'anshav omrim lo, and his men said to him, "Halo zeh David melech haaretz? Is this not David, king of the land?" That's our pasuk. In the Rashi to Tehillim 34, he quotes our pasuk, chapter 21, verse. Where are we? Verse. No, that's not the right one. 21. There we go. Verse 12 quotes our pasuk. So the Tehillim 34 that we say every Shabbat morning and this chapter that we're learning now are intimately connected. David, when we say that thing every Shabbat morning, we're quoting David's response to this very story. So it's a connection of our davening to our learning. So we'll stop there because it's the end of the chapter. So what else did I get ready for you? There's a Bereshit. I got something else ready here. What did I get you ready from here? This was just another example of my enemy's enemy is my friend. In Shmuel Bet, David goes to show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nachash. Where have we heard Nachash before? If you get this, I'll be very impressed. We have heard it before. We've learned
Yes,
it
we
together.
have heard it before. We've heard it before. I've heard it from you before at the Shiurim on Friday, on the Shabbos afternoon.
No, we've learned it in the Tanakh Shir.
In the Tanakh Shir.
Yeah. So remember the story where Shaul is trying to battle the Plishtim, not the Plishtim, I beg your pardon, the Ammonites. And the Ammonites, he wants to have their help, and he says they've got to gouge your eye out. If you want to be on my team, you've got to gouge your eye out. And he, Nachash was the king there, who Shaul was battling, and so here David says, "I'll show kindness to Hanun the son of Nachash, just as his father showed me kindness." Nachash showed David kindness because he was an enemy of Shaul. Enemy's enemy is my friend. So that was another thing I wanted
Nachash
to
means snake,
Nachash means snake, that's right. So we'll stop there because it's the end of the chapter. What did we do today? We showed that David had sinned by taking the sword of Goliath and relying on it. He thought he could get away with going to his enemy's enemy, but the people, not the king, the people wanted to kill him because he had been a thorn in their side, killed Goliath and killed 10,000 at least Philistines. The king is a tzaddik, according to Rashi and the Medrash, and doesn't want to harm David. David puts on a great show of being a lunatic, giving Achish the chance to say, just get rid of him, he's a lunatic, I don't need any more lunatics. And he allows David to escape. David then writes Tehillim chapter 34 at some later date, which we have incorporated into our davening. We also learned that Achish is a Philistine name, and that Avimelech is a generic name given to the king of the Philistines. Any questions about today's shiur? Questions, comments, complaints?
Can I ask you, did David write, how did he write everything down until that we quoted today? Was it from memory or?
Well, when he sat and wrote the Tehillim, that would have been from his memory, but he eventually wrote those Tehillim down.
Could actually write things down then.
We've never seen a manuscript that David wrote.
Right.
But there is no such manuscript exists that David wrote. But presumably he either wrote it down and passed it down, or it was passed down from father to son by mouth. And eventually, like the Mishnah, it was written down probably by the Anshe Knesset Agdola into Sefer Tehillim. But this for sure seems to have been written by David, because it says LeDavid. Where are we?
They haven't found anything.
This was written by David.
Johnny, they haven't found anything yet, but it's possible that they're still finding evidence today. I think of coins. Just this week, I read somewhere that they found coins with Hebrew on them. I mean, from those times.
It's
so
interesting.
They might still find it.
Yes, they might. It's interesting because up until fairly recently, the tipping point between what the modern scholars, archaeological scholars, accepted as being accepted fact was round about King David. There was no evidence for King David. There was evidence for Shlomo. There was evidence for the split of the kingdom. There wasn't any hard evidence for King David. In the last 30, 40 years, they have discovered stuff which seems to indicate, according to most people except the hardest left in Tel Aviv University who don't accept it, that King David did exist, and that it was around about 1000 BCE.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of stuff is also being destroyed by our cousins.
Well, yes, that's definitely true. The amount of stuff that's being destroyed in archaeological material in Yerushalayim is horrendous.
Yeah.
If you want to go and have a look at some of the damage they've done and try and undo the damage, you can go to the Temple Mount Sifting Project. I went with my son and grandson when they came here in January. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. One of these days I'll take a tiul there from the shul. You get a whole what happened was that the Arabs in the old city close to the Temple Mount, they dug up, I can't remember what it was, 90 tons, I think. 90 tons of archaeological material and dumped it in a valley.
Yeah.
The Israelis then went and took this 90 tons and slowly, ton by ton, sifted it by hand and have found all sorts of things. And it's an ongoing project. I went for a couple of hours with my family and we sifted and we found stuff, little bits of fragments from the time of the second Beit HaMikdash.
And the UNESCO isn't doing anything about it.
It's definitely a worthwhile visit. The Temple Mount Sifting Project. Look it up online and you'll have a look at it. So King David wrote this Tehillim. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Johnny. I must go. Excuse
me. Shavua Tov, everyone.
See you later.
Johnny,
bye.
Just one thing.
Bye-bye.
Johnny.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear the whole thing today, but this is a book published by the Ministry of Defense, the Chief Education Officer. And there's a terrific page. I'm not sure if anyone wants to give it to you, where he talks about exactly what you've been talking about. It says that it was Hadrian Adrianus who renamed Judea Palestina, at which point the piquante point is there wasn't a single Philistine alive at that point. They'd been wiped out. And Achish, in fact, thought he could use David at one point. He thought he could take him as an ally, as you said. But they outline very clearly the various battles of David.
So if there wasn't one Philistine alive, according to the Palestinian story, but that they don't descend from the Philistines.
They come from the Immaculate Conception, Philip,
Correct. Right.
It says the Philistines arrived, I think, in 1200 before zero.
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't say where they came from, so you may well be right about the Phoenicians. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, that seems to be accepted wisdom. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.